Good afternoon. I'll now call the meeting of the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment to order. My name is Kevin O'Reilly. I'm the MLA for Frame Lake, and I'm the acting chair of the committee today. Our first order of business is to open our meeting with a prayer. I will ask MLA Johnston to offer a prayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we gather here today as members of the Legislative Assembly, we are ever mindful of the opportunities to render our service to fellow citizens and to our communities, keeping in mind always enduring values of life, exerting our efforts in those areas and on those things upon which future generations can build. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Our next item is review and adoption of the agenda. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's one item on the agenda today, which is a briefing with Northwestel. Following that, there will be an in-camera discussion following the public portion of the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda? Not seeing any. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Ms. Knockleby? Any objections? No? Okay. Motion's adopted. Having reviewed and adopted the agenda, are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Okay, hearing none, thank you. Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment has identified digital connectivity as one of its 3 priorities for the 19th Legislative Assembly. This priority is consistent with the CRTC, or Canadian Radio Telecommunications Commission's, current review of the availability, quality, and reliability of phone and internet services in the North. To understand what is happening across the Northwest Territories, the committee has received 4 public briefings regarding the state of telecommunications in the North. These briefings occurred on December the 7th, and the recording can be found on our social media pages. Today, continuing our discussion on communications in the North, the committee will hear from Mr. Curtis Shaw, President of Northwestel. Today's meeting is being live streamed on the Assembly's social media channels, and presentation materials will be available on the Legislative Assembly's website after the meeting is concluded. To respect physical distancing requirements, all witnesses will be attending by video conference. I'd like to remind all members and our committee, our witnesses, that all comments, questions, and remarks will need to be directed to myself as the chair. Both members and the witness will need to wait to be recognized by the chair before speaking. I'll now ask members to introduce themselves for the record, starting with MLA Knockleby, please.
Katrina Knockleby, MLA for Great Slave.
Rylan Johnson, MLA for Yellowknife North.
And if we could have the 2 members who are joining us by teleconference, if you could introduce yourselves as well, please.
Jackie Jacobson, MLA Nunavut.
Brown Bondadroos, Decho.
Great, thank you very much. And we're joined in the committee room by our clerk, Mr. Glen Rutland, and by our committee advisor, Ms. Amy Lizotte. Thank you, members. Thank you, staff. We'll now ask Mr. Shaw to introduce himself and staff to proceed with the opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a great pleasure to be here today in a moment of such great opportunity for telecommunications across Northern Canada. My name is Curtis Shaw. I'm the president of Northwestel. I've been in this role for about the last 3 years, and I'm really happy to walk you through a short presentation today, and then we can have open it up to some dialogue and some questions. Just as a matter of before I proceed, or can you hear me okay on the internet feed?
Yes, thanks very much. Please go ahead with your presentation when you're ready. Thank you.
Okay, I think the clerk will continue to flip slides for me, so we can go to the next slide. So I'm calling here today from our corporate headquarters, Northwestel's corporate headquarters in Whitehorse, Yukon. It's on the traditional territory of the Kwanlundun First Nation and the Tonquachin Council. I want to recognize the Yellowknife's Dene First Nation, whose traditional territories house the legislature and the NWT, as well as all the Indigenous territories your elected members represent within the Northwest Territories. I had a good opportunity to spend portions of my career at Northwestel working across the Northwest Territories and living in Yellowknife. And I really look forward to the next committee meeting when I can join face-to-face in Yellowknife. Northwestel is really grateful to be able to operate on this diverse land and provide services to many Indigenous communities across the North. So we're going to talk a little bit about our plans over the next 3 years, some of the investments we've done, and then open it up to some dialogue. It's really the goal of the session today. We can go to the next slide. As part of the commitment we have to our communities, we have recently established a Northern Community Advisory Board that has a mandate to advise Northwestel on community issues and facilitate a deeper engagement with local communities across the 3 territories. I'm really proud today to announce the first 3 members of our committee. Megan Pizzo-Lyle is currently residing in Rankin Inlet, but she's been involved with businesses and community organizations across the territory of Nunavut. Daryl Bolio, who I think everyone in the room or most of you know and quite familiar with, is the president and CEO of Denendeh Investments, who I've worked with Daryl for nearly 20 years. I had the pleasure of sitting on a board with Daryl when I lived back in Yellowknife. And when you travel across the Northwest Territories today and you get cell service in Samba Cay or Litso Cay, some of the work that Daryl did with Falcon Communications 5 or 6 years ago really brought 4G cellular service to those communities. So he's been very instrumental in improving telecom in partnership with Northwestel through Denendeh, Articom, and Falcon Communications. And Jordan Peterson is also on our new advisory board. He used to be the Deputy Grand Chief of the Gwich'in Tribal Council. He's now working with the Untitled Gwich'in First Nation here in the Yukon. The Community Advisory Board will continue to grow over the coming year. I see it probably growing up to 4 or 5 members. We're really grateful for the role that these members have agreed to take on with us. I look forward to working with them. We've had our first meeting, and these appointments came to a force in October. So today I'm going to focus my comments around the opportunities ahead of us, and I'll start with introducing myself and the Northwestel team to you. So I currently serve as president of Northwestel. I have moved to the north from Saskatchewan about 24 years ago. When I first moved up here, we were primarily a telephone company. The majority of Northwestel's revenues when I started with the company came from long distance phone calls, believe it or not, just long distance. Our connections to people's homes were through copper wires, and our primary connection to the internet to the south was through a microwave system or satellite connections. So that was really microwave links running along the highway down into Alberta. Dial-up internet was just gaining in popularity, including the north. If you look at how people started adopting the internet in the late 90s and the early 2000s, it became really clear that our legacy infrastructure within the Northwest Territories and between our communities limited the ability to access internet technology in the north. So our company made a critical decision back in the late 90s to change this and invest significant private sector funding to do so. No other company has been able to or willing to make such investments in northern or remote parts of Canada. Over the coming years, Northwestel invested tens of millions of our own capital to lay hundreds of kilometers of fiber optic cable from Edmonton and Fort St. John up to the capitals of Yellowknife and Whitehorse. We've significantly invested in bringing local cable companies into the fold. Many of these cable companies that we had back when I lived in Yellowknife were providing television service only. We upgraded them to support two-way networks to support high-speed internet. All told, these improvements represent hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars of private investment in the region. So the end result today is Northwestel is much more than just a phone company. I'm proud to say we're Northern Canada's largest tech employer. We're the largest permanent private sector presence of the North, with over 500 employees and their families living and working in Northern Canada. Yellowknife proudly serves as our operational headquarters. We have over 140 employees working in the Northwest Territories today, including many serving as technicians in our smaller communities. We have a long-term commitment to the territory. In fact, one of the things that we haven't publicized is we just renewed our lease in the Northwest Tower in Yellowknife for the next 20 years. So we did a major renovation, making the Northwest Tower kind of our key high-tech space for development in Yellowknife. The next slide, Glenn. So if you look at some of our investments, we continue to invest significantly in the territory's economy with direct contributions of over $57 million annually. This would include a mix of capital spending, purchasing electricity, purchasing fuel from local suppliers. It does not include the spin-off benefits of 140 employees and their families shopping locally and spending in the north. We're committed to continually improving our northern infrastructure with over $40 million in direct capital investment per year, including bringing world-leading fiber-to-the-home technology for the first time to Hay River and Inuvik. These investments in fiber-to-the-home, representing millions of dollars, were made with zero public financing and show the advantage Northwestel continually seeks to bring Northern Canadians access to the leading technology and significant private investments in northern connectedness. Next slide. So if you go beyond our hard capital, our investments go much beyond fiber optics and radio towers and buildings. Last year in the Northwest Territories, we invested almost $250,000 in community partnerships across the Northwest Territories. We're a major donor of the Stanton Territorial Hospital Foundation, the Inuvik Sunrise Festival, National Indigenous Peoples Day, and the Yellowknife Fieldhouse, just to name a few of the activities we're involved with. And countless other activities that seek to make our communities better. You know, one of the things I'm really proud of, we have our employees, we encourage our employees to get involved in community service and have a matching community investment fund. If an employee is volunteering for an organization, we can make a cash donation based on the hours they work and volunteer with at the end of the year. Next slide. In the Northwest Territories, there's many improvements, of course, that are not only economical if the private and public sector work together. In these cases, I believe it is a huge advantage that has made Northwestel a trusted partner in delivering for the North. We were proud to be selected as part of a consortium to build and maintain the Mackenzie Valley Fiber Link after a highly competitive process. We were able to bring not only the world-leading technical expertise and private financing to the project when no one else could. We were selected to assume the maintenance of the Canada North Fiber Loop. I've got a map here in a minute that I can show you what this is going to look like. That's along the Dempster Highway after several RFIs were considered. Once again, we brought industry knowledge, industry expertise, but also $15 million in direct funding and $60 million in ongoing operational funding to keep that project going. We also selected as part of the competitive process to build Nunavut's new network, the Tamarmak Nunavut Satellite Network, which tripled available internet speeds in every single Nunavut community. And that project was executed over 2 years. It wrapped up the start of last year, and we were able to triple speeds to the communities. We were able to bring speeds to schools and health centers that they'd never been able to achieve before. And then most recently, and what I'm going to talk most of my presentation today about, is the CRTC's Broadband Fund. We had 4 projects selected out of 15 applications to bring high-speed internet to Northwest Territories communities through the CRTC's Broadband Fund, and this will dramatically change the telecommunications landscape in the NWT. Each one of these projects up on the screen here were open, competitive processes with several competitive bidders in every case. I believe we were chosen because we're able to deliver the best technical expertise with our northern employees, because we're willing to invest significant private sector capital in these projects, and because I believe we're delivering the best value to the taxpayer and northern residents. I'm going to just pause a minute. If I go to the next slide, I talk a little bit about COVID and COVID-19 and the impact we've had at Northwestel and with our employees. You know, obviously, we were all faced with some pretty extraordinary situations in March, April, May, as we moved to homeschooling our children, to working from home for those several months. And, you know, as a company, you know, our employees really had to step up to make sure that we delivered networks to support these activities. You know, some of the things, just a few things that I would highlight, we did increase usage caps for every NWT resident. So we removed usage caps in communities that supported unlimited, like Yellowknife, Norman Wells, Fort Smith. So behind the scenes, we waived residential usage for that period. But we also increased data usage in residential DSL in our satellite plans. Behind the scenes, what that meant, we had engineers that had to work all night long. We had technicians that were flying to communities, doing emergency upgrades. The first 3 or 4 weeks of the pandemic was a very hectic time for our staff. But one thing I can really say that our network held together extremely well, and we were able to meet the extra demands that we had from the public. Our technicians moved to something we called assisted self-installation. This basically means that instead of entering a customer's home, we would try to do the majority of the install or repair outside the premise. In some cases, we actually provided a modem or a set-top box or the equipment to the customer and coached them through how to install it over the phone, so we didn't have to enter a residential premise. And that was just for the safety of our employees and safety for the public. In August, we increased usage caps permanently in July, recognizing that there are still employees and students working from home, and there was a need for higher usage caps in our communities. You've seen all sorts of things in the Yellowknife market. Our retail store closed temporarily, but we have them now back open with various health screening processes in place, masks, sanitization, and store capacity limits. From a COVID response standpoint, we've had major benefits for adopting many of the safe work practices from our parent, Bell Canada. We've taken these commitments very seriously, and I'm proud that our network performed exceptionally well over the last 6 or 8 months. And back in March and April, the team stepped up to do major capital upgrades to keep the network running flawlessly for government, for residential customers, and for kids that are trying to learn from home. If you go back to January, I would have laughed at the prospect of trying to run our call center from home offices. But here we were at the end of March, and we ran probably 50 employees running a call center 7 days a week, largely working from home offices. So there was a huge, big lift for our employee base to pull that off and keep the network up and running. So we go one more, Mr. Clerk. So the project I'm going to talk about today is called the Every Community Project. For all the success and all the projects I just talked about leading into this, there are challenges certainly in our communities. The smaller communities in the Northwest Territories do not have the same speeds and the same access to technology that Yellowknife does. But thanks to the CRTC's Broadband Fund, we have a chance to change that over the next 3 years. So over the next few slides, I'm going to share with you our capital investments, what the CRTC's Broadband Fund does, what it's going to do for our NWT communities, and what the telecom landscape may look like 2 or 3 years from now. We've coined this the Every Community Project because we have plans to really bring every community up to that level of service over the next 3 years. Go to the next slide. It's a map. So I'll maybe start off and I'll talk a little bit about the fund and how we approached it. So a number of years ago, 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, the CRTC set out a standard for telecommunication services of 50 megabit per second download speeds, 10 megabit per second upload speeds, with customers needing or having an option to go unlimited. And that was something the CRTC set out as a national service objective. Previous to that, the national service objective in Canada for telecom was a phone line, access to dial-up internet, access to a long-distance network, and the ability to get a white page phone book delivered or have a listing in a phone book. So they changed that standard a little over 2 years ago to that 50 and 10 standard. So going back to 2019, we had our engineering team sit down and brainstorm. How can we leverage this fund and provide the best service to residents right across Northern Canada? We submitted a series of competitive proposals last October that really outlined how we could achieve 50 and 10 to every NWT community, every Yukon community, every Nunavut community. I'm really pleased to say that back in August of this year, August 2020, we received conditional funding from the CRTC to achieve this. So in the last 3 months, we've been out. Paul Gillard, one of our VPs that's located in Yellowknife, went on a community consultation project. And we met with every community, every First Nation, every Indigenous group about the project and what the impact will be on their home community. So we've been doing that over the last 3 months. And last week, we submitted the final engineering and the final statement of work to the CRTC for final approval. So we submitted all that work last week. after the community consultation period was concluded. So that's a little bit of the background of what we've been up to the last 3 months, and it really gives you a little bit of background on what we were trying to achieve by applying for these funds. Mr. Clerk, if you can go to the next slide. So the technology that we're going to talk about is really fiber optics to your home. We're going to talk about low Earth orbit satellites. We're going to talk about what we're changing in terms of the telecom landscape. So today in the Northwest Territories, almost every resident is served with a phone line, a copper phone wire. Some of this infrastructure was put into place decades ago. If you go back to the history of telecommunications in the Northwest Territories, the first copper networks were installed in the 1940s and the 1950s. They were originally designed to support voice, then came fax, and then came dial-up internet. All of our non-satellite communities now leverage these copper wires with a technology called DSL. And DSL has allowed us to deliver 10 or 15 megabits to the home, but we've pretty much maxed out with the technology, what we can do with this technology by squeezing more and more capacity out of a thin copper wire. So that's pretty much as far as we've been able to take the technology in the Northwest Territories. So when we were brainstorming up what this looked like, we looked at how to future-proof the network that would meet the needs of the Northwest Territories residents and government for the next 20 years. What's the best technology? What do we think is going to work? We did a line that we thought fiber to the home was the best technology to deploy. It's something that will last 20 or 25 years, and it has the ability to scale up speeds as residents' demands increase and the internet changes. What we're planning on doing is a complete replacement of the copper network and replacing it with fiber optic cable directly to your house. It's a similar project to what we just did in Hay River. We completed the Hay River project a year ago, and we're now installing fiber optic cable directly into customers' homes in Hay River and providing them faster service than what we previously could have done. Go to the next slide. So there's really two components here. So there's a backbone component, and this refers to the connection into a community. One of the communities we're going to connect with fiber for the first time is Detta. Detta today is served with microwave technology, and we are going to run fiber down the Ingram Trail down into Detta, and that's going to enable faster service to that community. The second component that we'll be doing here is attaching fiber optic cable to power poles and directly into customer homes, connecting it to the internet and putting a small modem or a receive unit inside the home. And this is dramatically going to improve speeds and quality in all the communities that we're talking about. Move to one more slide. Lots of questions on satellite, and we do have 8 satellite communities in the Northwest Territories. When I lived over in Yellowknife, there were actually 10 communities. We had Delaney that was on satellite. We had Nahanni Butte on satellite, but with various projects we worked on, we were able to bring them off satellite and move them over to microwave technology, which improved internet to those 2 communities. But we still have 8 communities left on satellite technology. They're Colville Lake, Paulatuck, Sambakay, Gamity, Wekwetty, Lutzokay. Those are some of the examples of communities that are served by satellite today. So what we did to try to achieve the 1510 standard is we partnered with Telesat Canada on a LEO solution, low Earth orbit technology. So right now, the Telesat LEO solution that we've proposed is expected to deliver faster service to these 8 communities, fiber-like service by the end of 2022. Some of the benefits you see of LEO, number one, it's closer to the Earth. So there's a lot less delay in the transmission. So today, if you're in Lutzokay and you're surfing the internet, there's going to be a half-second delay, and that's just because of the distance away from the Earth the satellite's located. So the low Earth orbit satellites are going to be much closer. It reduces the delay when you're on the internet. There's significantly more bandwidth. So today we're measuring our network in 10 megs, 20 megs, 30 megs. We're going to be able to deliver hundreds, if not thousands of megs to these communities over the next several years of LEO. And it's also lower cost. On a per bit basis, LEO technology looks much lower cost, and the Government of Canada and ISED have really backed our proposal from a deployment standpoint. On the next slide, I'm going to show you a little bit what it would look like in a Colville Lake or Sachs Harbor when we're done the network. So you've probably seen a lot of things in the popular press and media reports of Starlink and new low Earth orbit satellite technologies you can install on your rooftop. We're not talking about a direct-to-home service. We're talking about putting large, highly reliable dishes in a community working in tandem. So it looks very different from what you're seeing than putting a dish on top of your roof. The technology we've selected would see one large series of Earth stations constructed in a community, and they would work in tandem to pull in the signal in the community, and then we would distribute it to the home using wireless or fiber technology. So this is a depiction of what you may see in a Looks OK when we're complete with the network. The reason why those are bubbles on the slide or in the fenced area is the dishes have to move, and they could be susceptible to cold weather, wind, snow, things of that nature. So the proposal is to cover them with a geodome or a radome and have them fully covered up and isolated from the elements. So as the satellites come over the sky, there's a dish inside that track them. And there's 2 dishes always in operation. And the third dish there is for reliability in case one of the dishes breaks down. But this is the type of proposal we submitted for the 8 satellite communities in the Northwest Territories to really change what we can deliver from a residential standpoint and a government standpoint to those 8 communities. Go to the next slide. So one of the questions that comes up often is how fast, how much, what are the price points, how things are going to change. So if you look at a community today like Fort Simpson, the fastest speed you can get in Fort Simpson for residential customers is 15 megabits per second. When we're done this project, we'll be offering 250 megabits per second, but we can increase those speeds over time. If there's demand for something faster than that, the nice thing about fiber technology is we can continue to increase those speeds to meet customer demand over time. A few other things that I'd maybe talk about. Our proposal was really having the communities pegged to Yellowknife pricing. So we don't want to have a situation that a community is left behind or has to pay more in Tuktoyaktuk than they would in Yellowknife. So a key component of our proposal was pegging one rate to the Yellowknife market. We've also talked about removing the satellite or the standalone internet surcharge. So today, if you don't have a phone line, many customers don't have a phone line, you pay $20 extra for your internet. When this project's complete, that $20 surcharge goes away. So really great news from a consumer standpoint. It's going to lower prices, it's going to increase speeds, and it's going to provide customers with an unlimited option in every community in the Northwest Territories when we're done. The satellite communities are a little slower. If you look at it, we plan on meeting the national service objective of 50 megs down and 10 megs up. There's a potential to tweak that over time, but that's really what we've led with the satellite backhaul proposal with low Earth orbit satellites. So I'm getting to the end of the slides here. So some of the benefits that we've talked to the communities about. The first one is local service. Our technicians reside in the north. We're trying to increase our community technicians where we can in communities. We want to make sure that we're providing northern customer service. We have skilled community service technicians to help with installs. We have a northern call center to provide customer service. From an economic development standpoint, and this is one of the things our First Nation partners are really looking at opportunities here. In the Northwest Territories specifically, we're going to construct $30 million in new infrastructure. And during this construction period, we're going to seek out what we can do locally with qualified northerners, qualified contractors, unless there's specialized skills required to complete the project. We just completed a fiber project here in the Yukon. And we had about 50% of the construction crew were residents from 3 different First Nations along the route. We had the camp at a First Nation DevCorp, one of their camp services, and we really look to ways to maximize the economic development of not only the construction of the project, but the residual impacts of having better internet in every community in the Northwest Territories. Go to the next slide. One of the things that I think we all learned from the pandemic is how important the internet is. And when this project's done, I think from a government services standpoint, we can leverage this to provide better healthcare to residents in every community. We can provide better education opportunities for kids that are in communities that want to take online learning. None of that would have been possible, 5 or 6 years ago when we were dealing with satellite networks and microwave networks. But the proposal that we've got forward here has a huge opportunity to change government services in healthcare and education across the territory. And then quality of life, I think, goes without saying. We get so much feedback about how important internet is and how important reliability is. Quality of life, people really want to be on the internet. They see this as a pivotal thing from a day-to-day standpoint, everything from livelihoods to social networking to entertainment value. So there's a huge quality of life component. I'm going to close off the presentation here and talk a little bit about project timelines. I mentioned a little earlier that we went through some stakeholder consultation, and we were striving to get out to every First Nation group, every community mayor and council over the last 3 months, and we got out to the majority of them. One of the key points of feedback is every community would like to see this service implemented in spring of 21. Most of the feedback was, can you do it faster? We do have a 3-year rollout plan. We want to start in spring of 21, and we roughly have broken the Northwest Territories out into about a third. So in 2021, we're doing permits where we need to file environmental permits and for the phase 1 communities. And we're looking to complete at least 5 communities in 2021. 2022, we'd have another 4 communities complete, the ones that are in magenta or purple on the screen. And then in 2023, we would finish up in the Northwest Territories and launch service in those 8 LEO communities, low Earth orbit satellite communities. And so that's something we'd be looking to have the project complete by, towards the end of 2023. And that's the schedule we've submitted to the CRTC just this last week. I got one more slide, and we can open up to some discussion. This is a map of our fiber network. And, as part of the Every Community project in the Northwest Territories, I mentioned we're going to construct fiber from Yellowknife to Detta. But one of the other highlights that I'd maybe make is the Dempster Highway fiber that runs from Dawson City up to Inuvik, the red line, is going to form what we call the Canada North Fiber Loop. This is a 3-way partnership between the Northwestel, the Yukon government, and the Northwest Territories government. And our goal here is to provide a self-healing ring for telecommunications. We've had fiber that has melted from forest fires, been washed out by floods, hit by road construction crews. We've had it damaged by vandalism over time. The nice thing about running fiber rings is if the fiber is damaged anywhere in the ring, the connection and the data can flow in the other direction, seamless to the end customer. So what this means, if we have a cut anywhere on that large ring that runs from Dawson City to Inuvik, down to Fort Simpson, and then into BC, if we have a cut due to any issue on that ring, we can route traffic in the other direction. This is going to provide a huge reliability change for not only the Yukon, but for communities along the MVFL and communities in British Columbia. So this is a project the Yukon government's working on. They're the project proponents. We've agreed to fund part of this project as well as provide operational support for 20 years. And I'm pretty excited that when this project's complete, we will change reliability for all the communities along this ring, and even for some of the communities that are connected to the ring and other places. The next slide. So in closing, I'd maybe mention a few things to the committee and things to maybe consider, and it might generate some questions. I've been a real big proponent with our employees and our team to lay out a vision and to look for ways to collaborate with our northern partners and northern governments to meet that vision. Our vision statement for Northwestel is Northern Canadians prosper and thrive in a highly connected north. Some employees will ask me, when do we get there? And I don't think we ever get there. It's a continuous improvement that we need to make. It's not like we can invest and we stop investing and we're going to be done, because I think as soon as we're done the Every Community project, there's going to be something new that we're going to need to invest on from a telecom and a broadband standpoint. Another component I would make is I believe that every NWT community and every NWT resident should be connected with the highest quality network at fair rates. No resident should be left behind, and that's what we set out to do with the Every Community project. This is not about Yellowknife and providing better service to Yellowknife. It's about providing faster speeds, lower prices to all NWT residents. I think one thing we can align on is there is a need for increased infrastructure spending. When I go down and talk to the federal government, or I talk to any of our partners in Ottawa, I talk about infrastructure spending and the importance of public-private partnerships. And I truly believe that we can close this infrastructure gap by working together and through taking public funds and adding our private sector investment on top of it for the betterment of NWT communities. And the last component, and maybe talk to the committee about or leave you with today, is encourage the committee to think more broadly than just about telecom investments, but think about the telecom input costs in what Northwestel pays, what different service providers pay, different ISPs pay in the Northwest Territories. And again, I would look at things like cost of living for northern workers. That's a huge point of feedback I get from our employees. Cost of commercial power. Commercial power rates are a huge input cost if you're running an ISP in the Northwest Territories. Property taxes, transportation, things of that nature. So all those things are involved in rate determination. So this is a really key area for us to talk about is infrastructure investment as we move forward across different sectors than just telecom. So I want to thank everyone for your time today. I will open up to any questions or discussion the committee may have. So back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. I'm going to turn to committee and see if anybody has any comments or questions, and maybe each committee member could keep their comments, questions to two at a time, and then I'll keep a list going as well. So who'd like to start? Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Shaw, for the presentation. It's good to see you again. So my question's around, we've heard a lot in committee about the monopoly that Northwestel has in the north, and as well too, we speak a lot about increasing opportunities for Indigenous businesses and such. And I also think further to that, first, I guess my question is that is there any intent to partner with other smaller northern businesses in order to provide these, last mile or whatever connection to the homes? I'll start there. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Knockleby. Mr. Shaw, please go ahead.
Yeah, so from a competitive standpoint, one of the things that I would say is the market has been open for competition since 2002. And, the competition we see is really in the large business segment. We see competition for government services, for national customers, for banks, for Department of various federal departments. And they're not really directly in the residential market. I think that's where you see comments from your constituents and from residents across the Northwest Territories. I think as the competitive environment unfolds and we go through this regulatory proceeding right now, I think it's really important to look at a few things. Number one, there wasn't a lot of competition back in 2012, 2013, and we were rate regulated. And that was one of the reasons we were rate regulated. There wasn't a lot of competition. So it was kind of the bargain that we had in the markets we served. So that's maybe one thing I would highlight. The other thing is the competitive framework evolves. I think we have to be really looking after investment. Do we have a framework that will continue to invest in our smallest communities, increase employment for ICT and telecom workers in the north? Those things I think are quite important to this committee. And the other thing I would say from a competitive landscape is certainty around investment. We've been putting a lot of private sector investment into the ground, and we are looking for partnerships. We're looking for ways to close the digital divide. And I would say, it's going to be a balancing act in how we try to, look at those things.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Shaw. Ms. Knockleby.
Yeah, I would agree that the lack of infrastructure investment too in the north is really, really hurting telecommunications just as much as it's hurting transportation. For this line of questioning, I'll just make more of a comment. Another reason I think that it would be a good idea to have more of this community partnership, even if it's a sub sort of situation for your company, is that I'm aware of situations where fiber lines have been installed into the ground, and you talk about taking it out to data as well, and then it's been run through like contaminated sites areas, and that's not been there's been no coordination from the look of it to see how to talk between different around the routing to ensure that local community knowledge was factored into that. And the instance I'm thinking of is on the Mackenzie Valley line, but it's still something that I think is really being missed, and I think that's something we see very often in the north when it's often Southerners. You talk about competitive cost of living for your workers. However, that's that sounds like then you're bringing people from the south. So that makes me think about that as well. So it would be a win-win either way. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for
Ms.
the comment.
Knockleby. Sounds a little bit more like a comment, but I'll give Mr. Shaw a chance to provide any comments he wishes. Please go ahead.
I think you're absolutely right in terms of local partnerships. We've got a partnership with ACO Frontech right now, and they're an Indigenous-owned company. They do all of our fuel maintenance. So there are opportunities from a fiber optic standpoint, from a maintenance and support standpoint. As we went through these community consultations, it's pretty clear to look for opportunities for, local knowledge, having early engagement from our communities on the construction, the build, getting kids excited. The last thing maybe I'd mention, it's a little tangential to Ms. Knockleby, your comments, but we've got some goals internally here to increase Indigenous employment and in the territory. And for me to get kids excited about telecommunications and IT and get them onto our scholarship program, get them into the summer work program that we have, and then finally get them as a full-time employee. It's something that we've embarked on as a company, and I'm pretty excited about that and how that can change some of the community engagement we've had over the last number of years.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Shaw. Mr. Johnson, I think you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Shaw, for presenting today. I guess my first question is rather specific. Whenever I look at the maps, I see that there's a plan for a rural Whitehorse, but I represent constituents on the Ingram Trail, and as I'm sure you know, more and more people have been living out there, such that there's hundreds of residents. They're not actually Northwestel customers. They're on Bell cell towers, and so if a result is you're not in Bell's coverage, you have no access to internet. And I'm happy to hear that you're running fiber out to Detta. Maybe one day you can look at running it further down the trail as more and more people move out there. But at the very least, I brought this up with the CRTC too. When you look at their broadband fund map, there's just they don't know that people live there. So there's none of this coverage conversation. And when I look at your map, I would ask if it's possible to add a rural Yellowknife kind of component to your plans, because more and more people are moving out of Yellowknife municipal boundaries, and they're completely dependent on the Bell towers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Shaw?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mr. Johnson. When we bid on the CRTC broadband fund, we bid on what they call hexagons, and it was where they thought there was population. And the hexagons are developed from Industry Canada or ISED and StatsCan, and they weren't perfect depictions of the North. And so, I think when we're done this project in 3 years, it probably picks up about 90% of homes. So there's always going to be homes that are outside of the major area. So I can take Ingram Trail away and look at it. I know it's not included as part of the broadband fund, but if there is significant population there, this is something we'll have to work with the federal government on and see if there's opportunities to close the divide there, either through next generation wireless services or potentially a fiber service for those residents. So I can take that away and even get back to you outside of this committee forum.
Thanks, Mr. Shaw. We will take that as a commitment that you're going to get back to Mr. Johnson. Appreciate that very much. Mr. Johnson, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And I think part of there's a couple of contributing factors that why a hexagon wasn't created out there is that a lot of people on the Ingram Trails, residences are actually listed as in Yellowknife, or they use PO boxes. And somewhere in the data, it just got missed that, there's no one living out there when there's hundreds of people, which is, it makes it, in fact, one of the larger communities in the North when you get to that scale. I guess... another question is, happy to see a number of rollouts of fiber to the home. Can I get a sense of what, if any, plans are to expand fiber to the home in Yellowknife? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Shaw?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've now started in any new subdivisions, both in Whitehorse and Yellowknife, we deploy fiber to the home technology. So the days of running a copper wire or a coax wire are over. So if there's a new subdivision being built in Whitehorse or Yellowknife or any of our cable communities, we are running fiber infrastructure. We do pass some homes in Yellowknife. I don't have how many with fiber. But what we'll likely do over the next few years is start revitalizing the cable network. And as the cable network ages and some of it, over time it'll deteriorate, we will be replacing that technology with fiber. We've done that probably more in Whitehorse and Yellowknife. We had some areas in Whitehorse that were underground that we had to dig up, and we replaced it all with fiber technology. So that is the path that we're on. I just don't have a specific time frame when, say, Yellowknife will be 80 or 100% done with fiber optic cable, but it is in our technology roadmap for sure.
Thanks, Mr. Shaw. If you did want to provide that information to committee at a later date, that would be helpful for us to have. So is that something you could do?
Yeah, I can talk to the team, Mr. Chair, and come back with what the investment may look like.
Okay, thanks, much appreciated. I've got Mr. Jacobson in Tuktoyaktuk. Jackie, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Shaw, for your presentation. Just in regards to, I brought it up with the other people that do the provide internet service and cell service last week, but right now in the communities, I represent the most northerly communities, Sax Harbor, Baltic, and Olakuktuk. In 2023, in regards to getting unlimited internet, because the high cost of anything, like you go over your overcharge and you're charged an insane amount in regards to what you have to, you're paying for the product you're getting. That being said, you're saying in 23 that it's going to be unlimited across the north, and I'm really thankful for that. But right now, during COVID-19, or in this pandemic, people are going over on their internet, and then there's nothing to do. So what is Northwestel doing to assist satellite communities in regards to giving them a break in regards to costs and packages that they do have? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Jacobson. Mr. Shaw?
Yeah, so the satellite that we use over the Northwest Territories today has finite capacity on it, and that's the main reason we have usage caps. What we've tried to do, we don't want a residential customer to see an unexpected bill at the end of the month. So we've tried to do with all of our customers is we will email them, we will phone them, we'll let them know when they've hit their usage cap on a per month basis. During COVID, we did increase those caps slightly, but not nearly the same amount as we did in our fiber or cable communities. Over the next couple years, I think the key development that we're going to be waiting for is LEO. These LEO satellites will provide much more capacity at a lower cost, so we can launch that unlimited offering to Sax Harbor and Polituk. Over the next couple of years, I don't have really much from a news standpoint on dramatic improvements we can make with those communities today with the technology that exists. So, I think today, our approach is to make sure we provide the best quality service, but it is a finite service, so we have to, keep communities running. So that's a main reason for those usage caps and the way they exist today in our satellite sites.
Thanks, Mr. Shaw. Mr. Jacobson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that, Mr. Shaw. In regards to 2023, are we going to be able to have like you said earlier in the meeting, are we able to get the unlimited packages into the communities, satellite communities? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, so
Thank you,
sorry, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Jacobson. Yeah, Mr. Shaw, please go ahead.
Yes, with low Earth orbit satellite technologies, there will be enough bandwidth at a price that would be affordable from a customer standpoint, that we'll be able to launch an unlimited package in all 8 Northwest Territories communities. That was a proposal we submitted to the CRTC back in 2019.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Shaw. Ready for a second round? Oh, sorry, I've got Mr. Bonnet Rouge in Fort Providence. Ron, why don't you go ahead, please?
I see, Mr. Chair. It must be Mr. Shaw for your presentation. That was a very good presentation. I like that Northwestel is a responsible corporate sponsor, giving back to the North and to the communities. That's a big one there, and also that you're going to be increasing internet usage in the future. And I note that you do use the fiber optic line and also low orbit satellite system too. And I see that because I was interested in the low orbit satellite system because other companies do use them, and I see that you're only limited in the amount of data or upload and downloads in that system. I noted that other companies had been in that business and kind of moved away from it in a sense in a lot of areas, but Northwestel is still hanging on to theirs. And I heard about the Starlight satellite system from the south there, but they're not moving up north anytime soon. Nice to know that Northwestel has a parent company, which is Bell Canada. You know, you have unlimited funds and equipment and probably unlimited contacts. Because there's always a stumbling blocks for other companies when it comes to CRTC submissions and getting some of the business. I'm wondering if Northwestel has ever considered using some of the northern companies that are currently operating in the Northwest territories. There's New North Networks up in Inuvik. There's Cutlow Tech, an indigenous company operating out of Yellowknife, but from the Bay River Reserve. And also SSI Micro. I know you guys have an ongoing thing with SSI Micro, but I'm wondering if there's some ways to cure those burning bridges and stuff like that. And I just thought I wanted to hear your views on using these northern companies. Let's see.
Thanks, Mr. Bonnet Rouge. Mr. Shaw?
Merci, Mr. Bonnet Rouge. In terms of the competitors, I can't really speak for their plans and their networks and what they can and can't do. Our priority and my priority has been provide the best possible service to our residential customers. And that's been front and center in the mandate that I've given to our employees and our investments and the proposals we put forward. I know there's been media comments the last number of weeks. I know there's an active proposal in front of the CRTC. I do think the CRTC is the right venue or the right group to deal with that. They are going through a full review of telecommunications in the north. They are going to be talking to customers, our competitors, and will be participating through that whole process. But two of the three of the companies you mentioned are customers of ours today. So, we do sell services to the customer companies you mentioned, and we will continue to do so through our carrier services group. So, any issues or complaints that have been brought forward, I know will be adjudicated through the CRTC's review process.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Shaw. Mr. Bonnet Rouge, anything further?
Yeah, maybe one more. I'm just wondering about the because it's been mentioned before, and about the third-party internet access. I'm wondering if you could kind of spell out the landscape for me in terms of that one there, if you can, please. Merci.
Thanks, Mr. Bonnet-Rouge. Mr. Shaw.
So there is a proposal in front of the CRTC right now that was filed about third-party internet access. I think it's most appropriate for that process to deal with it. I don't have any further comments in a public setting about that process right now.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Shaw. Yeah, we understand that if it's before the CRTC, they're the body that will adjudicate on that, so thanks for that. So we're ready for a second round for committee members. I'm going to turn to Ms. Knockleby. Anything further? Okay. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I guess part of the reason committee is interviewing a number of ISPs is that we also plan on making submissions to the CRTC. And so I recognize that, you know, we don't have to get into all the details of what they're regulating, but committee needs to be able to ask questions to get a sense of what our submissions should be. I guess I wanted to start with the Mackenzie Valley fiber line. To me, part of the big debate we as a government have to make is that was a decision where we went out and we built publicly owned infrastructure. We set the framework, and whether that's a model we want to continue to do. And Northwestel is now applying for CRTC money to run fiber, and which you will ultimately own at the end of the day. And I guess I would just like to get your position on whether the model of the Mackenzie Valley Fiber Link, which I know ultimately you had a hand in creating, works, because we spoke to Tom Zucco from New North Networks, and he said once that went in, the wholesale rate he got from GNWT as opposed to previously from Northwestel was 1% of what it used to be. It went down, 1/100th. So I sit here and I see, well, why doesn't the GNWT just keep building the backbone of fiber and then let ISPs compete at a rate we set? So if you could just speak to that kind of decision that we as a government have to make, and how you see Northwestel fitting into that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Shaw?
So make a few comments. Like, we're probably one of the largest customers of the MVFL service today. We use it, we leverage it. We find it a good, high quality network. So I can give you that from a Northwestel perspective. It is a subsidized network. It is a government subsidized network. And I think one of the things maybe to think about here is that makes sense in other jurisdictions or for other projects. It's an expensive network. I think you see on the public record what it costs to build. It was done in a P3 fashion. So, from a P3 standpoint, those monies were borrowed and you're paying it back like a mortgage on a house today. So it is an expensive facility. But it probably wouldn't have been built by the private sector on the private sector's own dime, just because of the pure cost of construction. So, I think the Northwest Territories government in some respects was, ahead of the rest of Canada, seeing that they had a vision for telecom and they wanted to proceed with a project as ambitious as the MVFL. So from my vantage point, it's working. We use it, we leverage it. And it's something that will continue to use over the next decade and longer.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Shaw. Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess this kind of gets to the heart of the debate to me is whether we as GNWT decide to enter more into the subsidizing the telecom industry, or we simply just let CRTC continue to do that. And I guess the end result of CRTC doing it is that your company will likely, get the majority of that money, just being able to access that money, as opposed to us creating some sort of public infrastructure. And I guess I can't really ask you to comment on whether the GNWT should build more public fiber. But I do have concerns about the way that this is going right now, is that there's already publicly funded money going to Northwestel as opposed to just being owned by a public entity. And can I get a sense of I know this is before the CRTC and there's a number of different funds and this is all up for review, but how much money does Northwestel presently get subsidized by the CRTC?
Thanks, Mr. Johnson. Yeah, if you could provide some details on that, and if you want to take it away and come back to committee, that's okay as well. I know you mentioned that there's 4 projects that you received support through the broadband fund. If maybe you could use that as a way to frame your response. Thanks.
Sure. Maybe, Mr. Chair, what I can do is I can take away and provide the subsidy numbers behind the scenes. So the first thing that I would say is we used to get a subsidy for phone service, to provide phone service below cost. So example, in Sachs Harbor, the price of phone service may be $70, $80, $90 a month. We charge $33. So one of the things that was set out in the national landscape is they were removing voice subsidies from telecom providers across Canada. So those voice subsidies for Northwestel end next year. So they're going away, and I can show you what those look like. They've taken those funds and put them into a competitive pot of money called the Broadband Fund. And so Northwestel, on our 4 applications we were successful with, we were receiving $62.5 million across those 4 applications. And then we top it up with our own private sector investment. So, if you look at over the next 5 years, we're taking, those funds and we're able to increase them with direct private sector investment to deliver these types of services to end customers.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Shaw. We've been joined by Caitlin Cleveland, the MLA for Cam Lake, one of the Yellowknife MLAs. She's joined the meeting virtually. Ms. Cleveland, I understand you have some questions, if you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to Mr. Shaw for the presentation, and it's nice to get to see him again. And just listening to the questions that my colleagues asked, Mr. Chair, I think that I'm able to kind of piece together where this is going to go. But I wanted to have a quick discussion about if our end goal is to have internet in every single home in the Northwest Territories. I'm wondering from the viewpoint and where Mr. Shaw sits, what he sees as kind of the biggest hurdles or the best direction for the NWT to go in order to really close the digital infrastructure gap within homes in the Northwest Territories, similar to what was done once with voice calling, and how voice calling then became just a norm in every household. And what are the biggest hurdles that we need to cross within the Northwest Territories, and what direction do we need to go to make sure that internet is as readily accessible as telephone has become in homes across the world? Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Cleveland. Mr. Shaw?
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Cleveland. It's good to chat with you again. I would say, I'd start out with what are the government priorities from a vision standpoint. We sent out back in October of 2019 when we made a submission is we want every community to go to 50 megs download, 10 meg upload. These are the prices we submitted. So at the end of the day, I think if the NWT government comes out with those social objectives, those policy objectives, and look for ways to collaborate to get to the end goal. I think that has worked in other territories, other provinces. I think there's lots we can be doing collaborating with the NWT government to achieve those objectives. I think those solutions could be different. They could be different across the board. I think the important thing for me is we come up with a framework here that really incents us to continue to invest in jobs, invest in people, invest in technology, because this is not a one and done type of investment. I think from a broadband and a telecom standpoint, there's going to be continued needs for major investments in all 3 territories over the next 10 years. And I think coming up with a framework that works for continued investment is something that I would really encourage the committee to look at if they're intervening on the upcoming regulatory review.
Thanks, Mr. Shaw. Ms. Cleveland, further follow-up?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that. One of the things that, and I was happy to see in the presentation a section on the social and economic benefits, because one of the things that we really did see this year was a lot of our insecurities were highlighted by COVID. And one of those was our digital infrastructure in the Northwest Territories, the impact that that had on health, on education, on economy, people's access to mental health supports, everything was really tied into our digital infrastructure. And one of the things that we hear a lot about all of our insecurities in the North is this need for P3 relationships in order to really foster our financial and our technology needs across everything, whether it be housing, whether it be digital infrastructure. It seems to always come down to the need to build P3 relationships. And so I'm wondering if Northwestel has done the work to define what an effective P3 relationship would look like to them and are actively pursuing that relationship with different organizations. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Cleveland. Mr. Shaw?
Yeah, we've had a number of public-private partnerships over the last number of years. Some ones that come to mind, we had Connect Yukon in the Northwest, or in the Yukon, was something that we worked on in the early 2000s. The Dempster Highway Fiber Project is a partnership between Northwestel, the federal government, the territorial government, to run fiber up to Inuvik. The MVFL was a P3 the Gina Batty led. And I did talk about Tamar McNunalit, which is a satellite project that increased satellite capacity to all the Nunavut communities. And what we did there is we sat down with the government of Nunavut and we said, what's your biggest pain point? And if you go back 5 years ago, the biggest pain point was internet to schools and internet to health centers. So we designed a system that would provide really great internet to the schools. And I think when we started this project, the whole school system in Nunavut was at 14 or 20 megabits per second for thousands of students. And when we were done, we're providing 5,000 megabits per second to school kids in Nunavut. So as an example, where we sat down, we collaborated, we brainstormed, we had our engineers with our IT people, and we came up with a solution that financially worked for us, financially worked for them, met the needs of the community. So that's the type of thing that I think if we sat down and collaborated and brainstormed up opportunities like this, I think we could really close the digital divide in the Northwest Territories. The other thing, what I would say, Ms. Cleveland, just about our small communities is that it's sometimes more complicated and than just getting the base infrastructure into a community. There's digital education, literacy, how to keep kids safe on the internet. There's some other issues to consider around access to laptops and affordable computers. I know some of the communities I visited, we have great internet, great rates, and then all of a sudden a home doesn't have a computer to access the internet. So it is multifaceted, and if you're really looking to close the digital divide, there's infrastructure spending, there's what do we need to do at kind of a home level, everything from keeping people safe on the internet to digital literacy and getting access to computers.
Thanks, Mr. Shaw. I know, Mr. Jacobson, you've got another question. I've got a few myself as well, but we'll try to wrap it up maybe in the next 5 minutes if we can. Mr. Jacobson, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. No, Mr. Shaw, thank you for the presentation again. And just in regards to the fiber line for Tuck, maybe just an update, I guess, on that, and what time is your timeline? Thank you.
Mr. Shaw, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Jacobson, so right now our plan to put fiber, we don't have a plan specifically to put fiber in Tuck, into Tuktoyaktuk. We have a digital microwave from Inuvik. There is lots of capacity on that microwave today for government applications, for growth in the community. We can deliver the 50 meg service to Tuktoyaktuk right now without upgrading to fiber. If fiber does come down the road, obviously we look at removing those microwave towers into Tuck. But over the next 3 or 4 years, we didn't see it as a key requirement to deliver that end vision to the households.
Thanks, Mr. Shaw. Anything further, Mr. Jacobson?
Yeah, no, just in regards to that, thank you, Mr. Chair. Regard to that, then, Mr. Shaw, with the 50 megs that are coming into the community of Tuck, are we getting? What time is Tuck going to be getting the unlimited package, or for the community? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Jacobson. Mr. Shaw.
So if you go back onto my presentation, it'd be on slide 18. Right now, telecommunications is slated to get fiber to the home in summer of 2023. That's when the construction would happen and unlimited internet would launch.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Shaw. I've got 2 or 3 questions here myself, if I could. Your Northern Community Advisory Council, is there terms of reference that you might be able to share with the committee about what those individuals are being asked to do? And if you could just speak a little bit to how they were selected and whether those are paid positions in some way. Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of reference for the Community Advisory Council, there is an honorarium paid to the members. They were selected really for diversity and community involvement across the 3 territories. You know, with our 500 employees, the majority of them work and live in Whitehorse and Yellowknife. And so sometimes we get, you know, kind of big city centric because we're living and working in the larger communities. And really looking for people that had community involvement, business exposure, passion for technology and telecommunications that could give us more of a pulse on community feedback, community relations, and how we can really improve with our community relations. So in terms of reference, we're looking at a potential 5-person advisory board. The goal here is to select folks from across our operating area, really from the Yukon to Nunavut and potentially even Northern BC. We meet 4 times a year in a formal setting, but over the course of the year, there's ongoing informal engagement. You know, if there's a customer complaint, there's a way for these board members to bring it forward. They get involved with our community investment fund and opportunities at a community level. And the goal here is to provide advice to management on what's working, what's not working, what community members are saying, so we can keep that real community voice within our leadership team in the North.
Okay, thanks for that. Earlier you mentioned that you had just submitted perhaps a more detailed version of your Every Community project to the CRTC. Is that found on the CRTC website? And if not, would you be able to share parts of that with the committee without compromising, any of the proprietary information that's in there? It would just help us to better understand what the intention is to try to roll out improved services across the North. Thanks, Mr. Shaw.
Yeah, so the statement of work that, Mr. Chair, I can see what's publicly available and what we can share. A lot of the statement of work that we had were equipment lists and spreadsheets and probably some of the earlier documentation we had in terms of describing what we're doing and when we're doing it. We can send some of that community stuff along to the committee, basically a more in-depth version of my presentation here. That may be the most helpful from a community standpoint, because I know the statement of work that we submitted were technical engineering documents that really got down to level of communities, households passed, equipment lists, things of that nature. One of the things we did share with many of the communities in the Northwest Territories is the coverage map, because that was another question we got when we were in community consultation. So exactly where are you constructing fiber to my homes, and which homes are in, which homes are out. So we did a mock-up of every community to show where the fiber would actually run, to try to articulate, where we would have service and where we wouldn't.
Thanks, Mr. Shaw. Yeah, anything that you could share with us to better understand that, I think would be helpful. My last question, noting that we've got to wrap up very quickly here, is there hasn't been any discussion about cellular service along highways, and it continues to be a public safety concern. And I'm just wondering if you can comment about whether you have any plans as Northwestel to provide service along major highways, or if you want to speak to any of the challenges, some comments would be helpful for us. Thanks, Mr. Shaw.
Yeah, thanks for that. On the cellular front, there's a few things I would mention. We've looked at putting cell sites, cell antennas on top of existing microwave towers, and we've done that in a number of communities. So that's the fastest way to deploy a system, is leverage an existing building, an existing microwave tower, and put the cellular antenna on top. And we've done that in probably 7 or 8 different sites in the Northwest Territories. Probably the biggest challenge, I would say, on highway coverage is access to land and access to commercial power. If you have to put a cell site every 30 or 40 kilometers and there's no commercial power, that means we're putting fuel tanks in, all the environmental permits that go along with the fuel tanks and monitoring, as well as we have to fuel them up twice a year from a diesel standpoint. So there's an environmental impact of putting diesel in at a cell site twice a year, the greenhouse gas emissions and the cost of doing it. So, we're looking at cases where it could cost $100,000 a year to maintain a tower. And many of the federal programs we've seen will have upfront one-time capital to build a cell site, but no ongoing cost to subsidize it. And if you build a cell site, say on the road to Fort Liard, there's not a lot of traffic on the road. There's no new revenue for anyone along the road. It's just a public safety cost. And so I think the biggest takeaway I would have for the committee here is look for opportunities with power lines. If there's a power line going in, that is probably the best way to build a cell tower, is to make sure there's affordable hydropower alongside the highway.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Shaw. I don't see any further questions. One from Mr. Jacobson. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, Mr. Shaw, just a question in regards to the Tuck-Inuvik Highway safety concerns. There's about a 50-kilometer gap in there. Maybe 75 kilometers that you don't have cell service. And we did have cell service there before, but that the box was pulled out, so it's no longer there. I'm just wondering is it possible, for safety concern for my constituents from on the Tuck-Inuvik Highway and all the tourism that we do get, is it possible to put a cell tower, and there's a tower there that's accessible for you guys for power. Is it possible to get one put in? Thank you, Mr. Shaw, or thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Jacobson. Mr. Shaw.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Jacobson, I can take that as a takeaway. I thought the tower that you may be referring to was dismantled, taken down from a safety standpoint, environmental standpoint, but I can check. I know there was a cell site at Parsons going back 10 or 15 years with oil and gas development, but I think that may be the tower you're referring to. But I can take a look and get back to you, back to the committee here.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Shaw. I know you've made a number of commitments, and we will try to follow up with you on those. And but we really do want to thank you for your time today. I think it was a very helpful presentation, especially in terms of your plans rolling out in the future. And yeah, really, I again want to thank you for your time today. Any closing comments for committee, Mr. Shaw?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to the committee today. Again, I don't know 5 years ago if we would have been able to pull this off from a technology standpoint. So I think we have made some pretty good advancements. I would like to get over to Yellowknife soon, so and see everyone face to face again. So want to wish everyone a healthy and happy holiday season, and hopefully we can connect at some point in 2021. So thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Mr. Shaw. Yeah, it would be great to be able to stay in touch regularly in the future. So thanks again for joining us. So committee, that concludes, and I want to thank the public for tuning in and watching as well. That concludes the public portion of our meeting. I'd like to get a motion to go in camera. Ms. Knockleby, not seeing any objections. We'll take a short break so that we can conclude our discussions in camera. Thank you.
Thank you.